Between 1950 and 2015, the Hindu population of the country, the share of the Hindu population of the country has declined by nearly 8%, while the share of the Muslim population has risen by as much as 43%, says a study by the government's Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. This is a report that arrived yesterday that reveals that the share of Hindus in India's population saw a decrease from 84% in 1950 to 78% in 2015. Similarly, with the Muslim community, the population share went from 9.84% of India's population to 14.09% of the same of the population in the same period of 65 years. Now, the author of this report is Professor Shamika Ravi. The report is titled Share of Religious Minorities Across Country Analysis Between 1950 and 2015. And as you can imagine, it's already become a big media headline, a flashpoint on the political battlefield, and you're seeing it across media at this point of time. Professor Shamika Ravi is a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and the lead author of this report that has just been published. Professor Ravi, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you very much for your time here on India Today to discuss some aspects of this report. Of course, there are many findings, there are many figures, many statistics in this report, but obviously the one that's caught everybody's attention are the figures that I just read out. The share of the majority Hindu population that has declined by about 7.82% over 65 years since 1950, and the share of the Muslim population increasing by about 43.15%. Taking just those two figures, Professor Ravi, what are the implications of that?
Well, Shiv, before we get into the implications, clearly the demographic changes are happening on the ground. The idea of this paper was to look at what is happening, what is the status of minorities across countries of the world. This is therefore a cross-country study over 65 years for over 167 countries across all continents. Now, the main finding, what you notice here, are twofold. One is that the changes that are happening in India, which is the share of minority has grown significantly, and this is minority as a collective, and for individual groups, of course, that is the question you asked. Yes. But I want to highlight that this study is to find out what is happening to overall share of minority across countries. And we find that, India, the changes that are happening in this country are similar to what is happening in liberal democracies of the world, which are open and therefore quite fostering. They are nurturing towards minorities. Quite contrary to, of course, our own neighborhood, if you consider that almost all our neighbors, if you consider not just Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, but also Sri Lanka and Bhutan, yes, where the share of minorities have actually fallen alarmingly. So I think, these are the highlights in terms of the interest that I see in the Indian media. But of course, there are very fascinating findings from Africa, for instance, that there were 24 countries that had animism as the most predominant religion, and today none of those countries have animism as a majority. So I think the global demography in terms of religion is in a deep flux, and it's important to study these.
Yeah, you're right, Professor Ravi. The report, I have to say, because I did happen to read a large part of it, it does have a lot of information about different parts of the world, including India's neighborhood. Very eye-opening data about the neighborhood, in that comparison that you just mentioned as well. But the attention being paid to the figures that I just put out are obvious because we're in the middle of an election. There's an atmosphere of polarization. I'll get to that part in just a little bit. But taking off on something you just mentioned about a comparison between the figures here in India as far as the minority population are concerned compared, with how it is in countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. Do these figures in that case sort of blunt the narrative, ma'am, that minority populations or the Muslim population in India is under siege or under threat, or that India is anti-minority in some way? Does this blunt that narrative?
Oh, 100%. And let me be very upfront here, Shiv, that to the researchers in the room, everyone who's listening who might have seen this research, there is nothing new here, other than, of course, the larger global trends. But what has happened in India over the last 65 years is not news. Maybe the magnitude of the relative differences might be, which is why to us who follow numbers, it is always a bit surprising when we find India repeatedly under a global sort of a Western attack, that minorities in this country are under threat, because they are clearly not. And now there are many things that lead to relative shares growing over time, right? We in this paper do not get into specific aspects of it. Now, it could be fertility differences, but we know that is narrowing now. We know it could be migration, legal, illegal. It could be conversions, and we haven't had any serious conversations on any of this at a disaggregated level or even a regional sort of a level. So this study is therefore like a first step. It's a first step to recognizing the trends objectively. We are putting the facts on the table. So what you are asking in terms of implications will then flow from here, because now we have to see what is driving these kind of changes, but clearly it has policy implications for the future.
Professor, as far as the media is concerned, the elephant in the room is going to be the timing. This report drops after 3 phases of elections. There are 4 phases to go. Some would argue that the whole Hindu, I hate to simplify things, because this is, I have to say, a complex report. It has, different facets from different parts of the world. But the Hindu-Muslim part that I just quoted, becomes something of a weapon in the hands of our politicians during an election. So people will question the timing of this report coming out. How would you respond to them?
When you ask me this, the first thing that strikes me is, in the midst of the pandemic, when I used to follow the sort of the virus in terms of the spread of the infection, many people, like hundreds of thousands of people, used to follow these daily trends, but invariably, I would always get some people who would say, why are you putting out this number? Because they make people complacent. Or somebody alternately would say, why are you putting this number? This will put fear in people. Now, I am of the opinion, being an empiricist economist, that not knowing numbers or not knowing factually what is the situation on the ground cannot possibly be a better situation. So we have to know these things. Now, as far as your question on why this timing, frankly, the timing of research is really beyond us, because people have asked us, why didn't you put it out 2 months earlier? Some people are saying, why didn't you wait another month? But, this has been a research almost 8 months in the making, because this data set is relatively novel. The religious characteristics of states. This data set is fascinating. It's fascinating, and it has taken us, unfortunately, almost 8 months to put it together. Yeah. And once it went through the review and everything, it was ready, it was uploaded.